This is rental car number 29. Today I'm driving the 2016 Toyota Camry SE. This car retails for about $24,000 and gets 25 miles per gallon in the city and 35 on the highway. This is kind of a mixed bag with the critics too. I looked at a lot of stuff and Edmunds.com gave it a 3.8 out of 5 and then Cars.com gave it a 4.8 out of 5 and that's pretty common from what I've seen. It's just all over the map. But I liked it, and frankly, I think you will too. This is a really nice built car. So let's start off with looking at the trunk space, which I think is pretty important in a sedan like this. This is not a super wide car, so you're not getting an absolute ton of space back here, but it's decent. I'm pretty sure you could cram in a couple of suitcases back here without having any trouble. I am pretty disappointed to see that the opening into the cabin of the car is super tiny, so if you do collapse the seats, you're not going to be able to use that space very effectively. But speaking of the back seat, let's jump in and take a quick look. This is a decent sized back seat with room for 3 adults. I'm about 6 feet tall and I sat in the back seat with the passenger seat pushed back to a pretty comfortable distance. And I had, a few inches of legroom, which is smaller than a lot of the sedans I've been driving lately, but still pretty good. The back seat also has a center armrest that folds down to reveal 2 cup holders. But unfortunately, you don't get any power ports or climate controls for your passengers. All you do get is this small storage space right here, which is probably big enough for just about one cell phone. Let's jump into the front seat, because that's really where I think this car shines. I want to draw your attention to the red stitching on this model. It's something that I really like, and it's actually the reason I'm doing this review. Typically, I wouldn't review a 2016 now that it's 2017, but I just couldn't help myself, because I really like the way this looks. And beyond the stitching, you really do get a lot of nice features in this car. There's a nice sized digital screen that's in the gauge cluster right above the steering wheel. That has some decent color and some nice clarity to it. The gauges are a decent size, so I didn't find myself looking at the speed on the center screen. Instead, I left it on this fuel economy screen for most of the trip. And interacting with this digital screen is actually pretty nice. You get some pretty decent buttons on the steering wheel. They really do have a nice feel to them. This left side has the volume controls and then some buttons to interact with the center display. And then you also have the buttons here on the right side to interact with the small digital screen. You do not get a push button start on this model. You get an old-fashioned key, which I think is slightly disappointing. The key itself is also not great. It's really light, so it doesn't have a good feel in the hand. And the buttons are a bit small, so it's not as easy to use as some of the other key fobs out there. But on a more positive note, the center console has a nice look and feel to it. Let's start with the main display, which is actually a pretty decent size. There's not a ton of features here. I mean, you're not going to be downloading any new apps for this. But it is nice that you have some dedicated buttons on the left and right side so that you can jump right to the important things. And I found that navigating through all the menus and getting to what I actually wanted was fairly easy. And directly below the screen is the climate controls, which are, I guess, decent. I mean, you do have dedicated buttons for everything that's important, but unfortunately you don't get a digital readout, so you don't really know what the temperature of the car is. You kind of have to guess with these 2 dials, and I don't really like that. I found myself really kind of adjusting things quite a bit while I was driving this car. And then below that is this really nice storage space right behind the gear shift. It's a little bit difficult to get to when the car's in park, but it's a really decent size, and you get a DC outlet right here along with a USB port and an audio in. This is more than big enough to store a cell phone, though it is kind of a pain in the butt to get to while you're driving the car. So instead of using that area, I found myself using this sort of square rectangular-ish place right here behind the gear shift to store my cell phone, which worked out pretty nicely. There's also a decent sized storage space in between the 2 front seats. It's fairly deep. I was able to get a pretty big Starbucks cup in there without a problem, and it does have a power adapter outlet right there in the bottom. And since we're really talking about storage for a bit, let's look at the glove box. It's pretty big, not super deep, but I think you can get a little bit more than your owner's manual in here without a problem, which I think is kind of important. There's also a manual valet lock, so you can lock your glove box if you do have someone else driving the car for a bit. And then up top, nothing really special. You got 2 lights that are really easy to interact with, and then your standard sunglass holder that has a little bit of padding, but nothing really special there. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to end with some negativity. There's no blind side detection on this car, so both the passenger and driver's side mirrors are just kind of the standard old-fashioned mirror. This kind of safety feature is super cheap to install, so I really don't understand why Toyota didn't include it. This model also has the old-fashioned pedal parking brake, which, yeah, look, it works fine, but I'm just not a big fan of anymore. Beyond that, this is a really nice car. I mean, it's small, so it corners pretty nicely. The acceleration is decent, and like all Toyotas, it's decent to drive. You're not going to beat anyone off the line here, but I was pretty comfortable driving this for about 3 days, going several hundred miles a day. Didn't have any problems and liked it a lot. All right, so that's a 2016 Toyota Camry SE. Pretty decent for a $24,000 car. Not a lot of bells and whistles, but despite all that, I think I'm going to give this one 4 stars. Now, admittedly, this feels a little bit inflated. Probably should give it more like 3.5. But I really like the way it drives, and I love that red stitching. So why don't you go out, take it for a test drive, and tell me if I'm off base here. And hey, you made it to the end. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Please leave me a comment if you think I'm doing anything right or wrong, and I hope you'll join me next time when I review a big 2017 Chevy SUV.